Welcome to Lore of Rings of Power, where we uncover the hidden roads of Middle-earth and tell the tales that Tolkien never wrote. Before we begin, take a moment to let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time of day or night this narration has reached you. Tonight, we follow one such path, where Galadriel's vengeance burns brighter than her light, and the Dark Lord may not rise alone. In the twilight hours before dawn, when shadows dance at the edge of sight and ancient whispers stir the air, there exists a tale of fire and fury, of love twisted into hatred, and of light that threatens to become shadow. The Lady Galadriel, mightiest of the Noldor who remain in Middle-earth, stands upon the precipice of destiny. Her golden hair catches the last starlight of the Second Age, while her eyes burn with the memory of betrayal. And something deeper, something she dare not name. The echoes of a region's fall still ring across the lands like the death cry of Celebrimbor's forge. Sauron has claimed his prizes 9 rings for mortal men, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, and the secret knowledge of the 3. Yet the greatest prize of all eludes him still. The heart of she who saw through his deception, who felt the pull of his darkness, who rejected his offer to rule by his side. Galadriel, commander of the northern armies, bearer of Nenya, keeper of ancient grudges, now faces her greatest trial. The question that haunts the wind is not whether she will seek vengeance, but what price she will pay to claim it. For in the manuscripts of Tolkien's hidden lore, in the unfinished tales and forgotten letters, there are hints of a bond between light and shadow that transcends mere enmity. When Sauron walked among the elves as Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, Galadriel alone perceived the darkness within his fair form. Yet perception is a double-edged blade, and to see truly into the abyss is to risk having it see into you. The fire that burns in Galadriel's eyes is not merely the flame of righteous anger. It is the ember of something far more dangerous. The seasons turn, and memory becomes myth. Myth becomes legend, and legend fades to whisper. But the echo of Halbrand's voice refuses to die. In the quiet moments between battles, when the clamor of war gives way to the deeper silence of the soul, Galadriel hears him still. Not as Sauron, the deceiver, the Lord of Mordor, but as the man who walked beside her on the raft in the sundering seas, who spoke of redemption with a voice that seemed to carry the weight of genuine sorrow. The cruel irony gnaws at her. In all her millennia of existence, through the light of the 2 trees and the darkness of Morgoth's reign, through the kinstrife of the Noldor and the wars of Beleriand, no voice had ever spoken to the loneliness that dwells at the heart of immortality, until his, the broken king of a forgotten land, who claimed to know the burden of leadership, the weight of choices that echo through ages. How perfectly he played her, not through lies, but through truths wrapped in shadows. For Halbrand was no mere disguise, no simple mask worn to deceive. In those moments on the ocean's breast, when death seemed preferable to the endless grey of exile, something genuine flickered between them. Sauron, master of corruption, who had learned to twist every noble impulse to his will, discovered something unexpected in the Lady of Light, a spirit that matched his own in pride, in will, in the terrible isolation that comes with power beyond mortal comprehension. And perhaps, though she would die before admitting it, she sensed a kinship there. two beings set apart from their kind, bearing burdens too great for others to understand. The memory haunts her dreams now, his hand reaching for hers in the darkness, his voice, rough with what seemed like genuine emotion, speaking of the need to heal Middle-earth's wounds. The way he looked at her when she spoke of the light of the Valar, not with the mockery she expected, but with something that might have been longing. Was it all performance? Was every moment calculated to ensnare her? Or was there, in the deepest recesses of Sauron's corrupt heart, a fragment of Meren that still remembered the music of creation? These questions torment her more than any physical wound. For Galadriel, who has looked into the mirror and seen the future's many paths, who has wrestled with the temptation of the One Ring and emerged victorious, finds herself facing an enemy she cannot defeat with sword or sorcery. Doubt. The doubt that she was chosen not for her strength, but for her weakness. That her pride, her determination to prove herself worthy of her people's legacy, made her the perfect target for Sauron's most sophisticated deception. And yet, in the deepest watches of the night, when even her elven guards believe her to be at rest, she finds herself wondering if the deception flowed both ways. If he who had learned to mimic love had, in mimicking it, stumbled upon its shadow. If the tears that fell when she rejected his offer were born not merely of frustrated ambition, but of something more complex, more dangerous. The possibility that in seeking to corrupt her, he had opened a door in his own dark heart that he could never close again. Across the sundering seas, the great island of Nen Menna rises from waters that remember when the world was young. Its harbors gleam with ships bearing the star of Elendil, its towers scrape the belly of storm clouds, and its people walk in the shadow of a glory that grows more terrible with each passing year. But even in the height of their power, the Nentmenreans can feel it. The tremor in the earth, the whisper in the wind, the sense that something vast and terrible stirs in the deep places of the world. Jill, Galad's warnings echo in the minds of the wise, carried on every ship that makes port in Romenna. The elf king speaks of darkness rising, of the enemy's return, of the need for alliance between the free peoples of Middle-earth. But pride is a poison that seeps deep into the bone, and the Nentmenreans have drunk deeply of it. They are the blessed of Eru, the heirs of Elros, the greatest of mortal men. What need have they of elven counsel? What threat could possibly touch their mighty realm? Pharazôn the Golden sits upon the throne of the sea, and his thoughts are not of alliance but of dominion. The reports from his spies paint a picture of Middle-earth in chaos, a region fallen, the elves in retreat, whole regions of the continent ripe for conquest by a strong hand. He sees opportunity where others see catastrophe. The weakness of the elves is Nen Menna's strength. Let them plead for aid. It will only make the terms of Nen Menna's intervention more favorable. But in the harbor districts of Romenna, among the faithful who still reverence the memory of the undying lands, different whispers circulate. Elendil the Tall walks among his people with a heavy heart, for he alone among the mighty of Nen Menna truly comprehends what Jill, Galad's warnings portend. He has seen the ancient maps, studied the genealogies of evil, traced the long history of Shadow's return. This is not some petty dark lord, rising in a distant corner of Middle-earth. This is the necromancer of Dol Guldur, the sorcerer of Mordor, the last and greatest servant of Morgoth, the Black Enemy. And Galadriel, Lady of Light, commander of the northern armies, stands at the heart of the growing storm. Her warnings, carried by swift ships to Nent Mena's courts, speak of a darkness that cannot be bargained with, cannot be bought, cannot be contained by walls of stone or strength of arms. She has looked into Sauron's eyes and seen the malice there, but also something else, something that makes her warnings carry a weight of personal knowledge that chills even the bravest hearts. The visions come to her now unbidden, in the hour before dawn, when the veil between present and future grows thin. She sees great waves rising, higher than mountains, swallowing the proud towers of Nent Mena. She sees the earth split and fire pour forth from wounds in the world. She sees the faithful fleeing in ships laden with the treasures of their doomed realm, carrying the white tree and the Palantir to shores that do not yet exist. And through it all, she sees his face, Sauron's face, wearing an expression of triumph so complete, so terrible, that it seems to encompass the ending of ages. Yet the cruelest vision of all shows her standing on a shore of black sand, watching the great ships of Nent Mena burn on a wine, dark sea, while a figure in shadows approaches from behind. She knows without turning that it is he, no longer Halbrand the penitent, no longer Anatar the giver, but Sauron revealed in all his dark majesty. He speaks her name like a prayer and a curse combined, and she feels the terrible pull of his presence, the magnetic attraction of power, calling to power across an abyss of moral darkness. The words he speaks in these visions vary, but their meaning is always the same. I told you we were meant to heal Middle Earth together. Look what your rejection has wrought. The great island sinks, the kingdoms burn, and still you stand apart in your perfect, pristine righteousness. How many must die for your pride, Lady of Light? In the forges of Ost, in Edel, now fallen and cold, the memory of creation lingers like smoke from a dying fire. Celebrimbor's hammer lies shattered among the ruins of his workshop, its silver surface stained with the blood of its maker. The rings of power, greatest works of the Second Age, are scattered to the winds, some claimed by Sauron's malice, others borne away by desperate hands into hiding places that will not see light for ages yet to come. Yet in the shadows of Gil, Galad's stronghold in Lindon, new fires are kindled, and the whispered arts of the elven smiths echo once more in carefully warded chambers. The loss of a region was catastrophic, but it was not complete. Elrond, half-elven, bearer of Vilya the Blue, has gathered the surviving craftsmen to his side. Their task is both desperate and necessary to forge weapons capable of standing against the Dark Lord's might, to create new rings of protection for the scattered realms of the free peoples, to preserve in gold and mithril the fading light of the elder days. Galadriel walks among these halls like a spectre of vengeance, her presence both inspiration and warning to those who toil at forge and anvil. She bears Nenya, the ring of water, the white ring adorned with adamant that catches starlight and holds it prisoner. It pulses with power on her finger, responding to her anger, amplifying her grief until the very stones of Lindon seem to weep with her. The other ring? Bearers watch her with growing concern, for they sense in her something that echoes their greatest fear. The corruption that comes not from evil's touch, but from good's own unbending pride. The lore, masters speak in hushed tones of the ring's properties, of how it reads the heart of its bearer and reflects back their deepest nature. In Jill, Galad's hands, Vilya burns with the steady flame of kingship. In Elrond's grasp, it whispers of healing and preservation, of the long defeat and the hope that lies beyond despair. But in Galadriel's possession, Nenya blazes with something altogether more dangerous. The fire of a will that will not bend, cannot break, and may well consume everything around it in its desire for justice. The visions come to her through the ring's power, showing her glimpses of what might yet be forged in the secret places of the world. She sees a great furnace burning in the heart of Mount Doom, where the fires of creation first shaped the world. She sees a golden ring taking form in those flames, a circlet of such beauty and power that it seems to contain all the light of the world and all its shadow. She sees Sauron's hands, no longer wearing the fair form of Anatar, working the metal with skills learned in the earliest days of time, pouring into it not merely his knowledge and his will, but something more fundamental, his very essence, his capacity to dominate and control. And she sees herself there, standing in the shadows of that dreadful workshop, watching as the master ring takes its final form. In the vision, she is not there as enemy or prisoner, but as what? Collaborator? Co-conspirator? The sight fills her with such revulsion that she tears the ring from her finger, casting it aside as if it burns her flesh. But the damage is done. The possibility has been planted, the seed of a darker path that her immortal mind cannot now uproot. For the truth that terrifies her most is not that Sauron might complete his great work and claim dominion over all the rings of power. It is that some part of her, some fragment of the pride that drove her into exile from Valinor in the first place, whispers that such dominion might not be entirely wrong. Middle-earth lies broken, its peoples scattered and afraid, its kingdoms falling one by one to shadow and despair. Perhaps what the world needs is not the gentle guidance of the wise, but the iron rule of the strong. Perhaps Sauron's great error was not in seeking mastery, but in seeking it alone. The thought is treachery, blasphemy against everything she has sworn to protect. Yet it will not leave her. Echoing in the quiet moments when duty's demands are met and the heart is left to wrestle with its own darkness, she finds herself studying maps of Middle-earth with new eyes, seeing not the realms she has sworn to defend, but territories that could be claimed, populations that could be guided, chaos that could be ordered by a sufficiently powerful will. The vision of herself and Sauron standing together over a healed Middle-earth returns again and again, each time seeming less abhorrent and more practical. Beyond the Blue Mountains, in the uttermost north where even the eagles dare not fly, the ice begins to crack with sounds like thunder. Ancient glaciers, laid down in the years of the trees when the world was young, split and calve into the grey seas, revealing chambers of stone that have not seen light since Morgoth's footsteps first scarred the earth. And in those chambers, where the cold has preserved what fire could not destroy, something vast and terrible begins to stir. The dragons are not gone. They were never gone. When Ancalagon, the Black fell upon Thangorodrim in the War of Wrath, when the host of Valinor broke the power of the first Dark Lord, many of his servants perished in that final conflagration. But not all. The greatest of the fire drakes were slain, yes, but their lesser kin, the cold drakes of the north. The wingless worms that burrow through stone and ice, these survived. They retreated to the furthest reaches of the world, coiling in caves of crystal and shadow, waiting for the call of a new master. Now that call echoes through the hollow places of the earth. Sauron's voice, no longer disguised by fair forms or honeyed words, rings out in the speech that dragons know, the black tongue of Mordor, the language of dominion and despair. He summons them not as Morgoth did, through fear and torment, but through promise of prey, through the prospect of treasure hoards beyond counting, through the ancient dragon, hunger for gold and glory, and the terror of lesser beings. The first to answer is Scatha the Worm, a cold drake of terrible size and cunning, who has slumbered for an age in the caves beneath the grey mountains. His awakening sends tremors through the earth that are felt as far south as the halls of Khazad-dûm, where Durin's folk pause in their delving to listen to sounds they have not heard since the elder days. When Scatha emerges from his lair, the very mountains seem to bow before him. His scales are the color of winter storm clouds. His eyes burn with malice colder than the uttermost north, and his breath freezes the blood in the veins of any who dare oppose him. But Scatha is not alone. From caverns beneath the Sea of Ran comes Dane the Golden, a fire drake whose hoard spans 7 kingdoms and whose memory stretches back to the forging of the first rings of power. She remembers the taste of dwarf gold, the satisfying crunch of mithril mail between her teeth, the sweet terror in men's voices when they speak her name in whispers. Her awakening sets the eastern forests ablaze, sending refugees fleeing westward with tales of a dragon whose very presence turns fertile lands to ash and shadow. And from the deepest places, from caverns that reach down to the roots of the mountains themselves, comes a stirring that makes even Sauron pause in his dark designs. For there, in chains of adamant forged by the Valar themselves, lies one who makes all other dragons seem like worms, Glorung the Golden, father of dragons, the deceiver, who was thought slain by Titu-Rin-Turambar in the First Age, but whose malice was too great for death to contain. The chains still hold, but they grow weak with age, and his dreams begin to seep into the waking world like poison. Galadriel feels their awakening like physical pain, for the 3 rings were made to preserve and protect, and their power recoils from the presence of such ancient evil. In her visions, she sees great wings blotting out the sun, feels the heat of dragon, fire washing over the peaceful valleys of Rivendell and Lothlorien. She sees the great cities of men, Gondor that is yet to be, Rohan of the Horse Lords, Dale beneath the mountain, all consumed in flames, so hot they melt stone and boil rivers. But the most terrible vision shows her standing alone on a field of battle, surrounded by the corpses of the brave and the good, while above her circles a dragon greater than any that have yet awakened. Upon its back rides a figure in black armor, and though she cannot see his face, she knows with horrible certainty that it is Sauron, no longer content to work in shadow and deception, but claiming his dominion openly, with fire and ruin as his heralds. In that vision, she raises Nenya high, calling upon all its power to shield the last remnant of the free peoples huddled behind her. But her strength is not enough. The dragon's breath overwhelms her defenses, and as she falls, She hears Sauron's voice carrying on the wind. You could have stood beside me, Lady of Light. You could have helped me heal this broken world. Now see what your pride has purchased. Ashes and ending. And the long night that comes after. In the mirror of her own heart, Galadriel sees reflected the face that haunts her dreams and waking hours alike. Not the terrible visage of Sauron in his full malice. Not the fair form of Anatar the Deceiver, but the worn features of Halbrand. The lost king who claimed to know the weight of crown and conscience. It is this face that torments her most, for it carries with it the memory of moments when the mask seemed to slip, when something genuine flickered in those dark eyes, when the Lord of Mordor seemed almost human. The other Elder do not understand. How could they? They see only the evidence of deception, the elaborate web of lies spun to ensnare the mighty and bring low the works of the free peoples. They speak of Sauron as they would of any enemy, a force to be opposed, a darkness to be driven back, an evil to be destroyed. But Galadriel, who walked beside him on the sundering seas, who felt the pull of his presence like a tide in her blood, knows the truth is far more complex and far more dangerous. For in those moments of seeming honesty, when Halbrand spoke of redemption and healing, of the burden of leadership and the loneliness of power, he was not entirely lying. The greatest deceptions always contain seeds of truth, and Sauron, master of corruption, had learned this lesson well. But what if, in reaching for those seeds of truth to construct his web of lies, he had inadvertently revealed something he had meant to keep hidden? What if the loneliness he spoke of was real? What if the desire to heal Middle-earth's wounds, however twisted his methods, was genuine? The possibility terrifies her more than any dragon's roar or orc horde's charge. To see Sauron as pure evil is simple. It makes the choice clear, the path straight, the duty unambiguous. But to see him as he truly is, a fallen Maya, a servant of creation turned to dominion, a being of immense power and knowledge driven by wounds so deep they have festered into malice. That is to confront a darkness that mere swords cannot cut, mere rings cannot bind. She remembers the moment on the raft when his hand touched hers, and the spark that passed between them. It was not the calculated touch of the tempter, she realizes now, but something altogether more dangerous recognition. Two immortal beings, set apart from their kindred by power and purpose, finding in each other a reflection of their own isolation. In that moment, before duty and destiny drove them apart, there had been something that might have been. Not love, perhaps, but its shadow. Understanding, kinship, the recognition of like calling to like across an abyss of moral difference. And the most terrible truth of all, some part of her responds to it still. Not to Sauron the Dark Lord, not to the enemy of the free peoples, but to the being beneath the titles, the Maya who chose dominion over servitude, who looked upon the chaos of Middle-earth and decided that what it needed was not guidance but rule. She finds herself, in the darkest watches of the night, wondering if he might not be right. The free peoples of Middle-earth struggle and suffer. Their kingdoms rise and fall like waves upon the shore, their brief lives consumed by petty conflicts and passing fears. Might they not be happier under the rule of one who could impose order, ensure peace, guide them with the wisdom of ages? The thought is treason, and she knows it. But knowledge does not make it easier to banish. For Galadriel, who has seen the glory of Valinor and the wisdom of the Valar, also knows their greatest flaw: they are too distant, too removed from the struggles of incarnate beings to truly understand what those beings need. Perhaps what Middle-earth requires is not divine guidance from afar, but the direct rule of one who understands both power and suffering, creation and destruction, light and shadow. When these thoughts come to her, she touches Nenya and tries to draw strength from its pure light. But even the ring seems to respond to her inner turmoil, its radiance flickering like a candle in a storm wind. For the rings of power were made to preserve and protect. But what they preserve and protect depends entirely upon the will of their bearer. And Galadriel's will, tested in the fires of betrayal and tempered by the hammer, blows of loss, begins to bend toward purposes that would horrify those who trust in her wisdom. The maps of Middle-earth spread across Jill. Galad's table tell a story of dissolution and desperate alliance. Red markers show the advance of orc armies from Mordor. Black pins mark the sites where Nazgul have been sighted, and great swaths of formerly green territory are now shaded in grey. Lands abandoned to shadow, realms that have fallen to despair or been evacuated in the face of overwhelming darkness. The free peoples huddle in ever-shrinking circles of light, while around them the tide of malice rises. But in the margins of those maps, in the spaces between kingdoms and beyond the borders of known realms, new powers are stirring. Reports come from merchants and refugees, from the scattered survivors of fallen cities and the rangers who patrol the wild lands, of movements in the shadows that serve neither light nor dark, but some purpose altogether more ambiguous. Strange alliances are forming, born not of hope or despair, but of simple expediency. The cold calculation of those who see which way the wind is blowing and adjust their sails accordingly. In the south, beyond the borders of Gondor, that will be, the tribes of the Southrons whisper of a new prophet who speaks in riddles of gold and shadow, promising glory to those brave enough to seize it and doom to those who cling to the old ways. His words carry power, they say, and his promises are backed by gifts of weapons forged in strange fires, armor that turns blade and arrow alike, rings of lesser power that grant their bearers strength and courage beyond mortal measure. The wise among the Southrons counsel caution, but wisdom is a cold comfort when enemies press from the north and winter's grip tightens on the land. In the east, where the sea of Ruthan meets the shadow of the grey mountains, the Easterlings gather in numbers not seen since the elder days. Their chieftains speak of ancient grudges and older promises, of debts owed and payments soon to be collected. They do not march under the banners of Mordor. Not yet. But their weapons are sharp and their hearts are hardened against the pleas of the West. Among them move figures in dark robes, bearing staves carved with runes that hurt the eye to look upon, speaking words in languages that predate the sundering of the world. And in the depths of Moria, where Durin's folk delve ever deeper in search of mithril to fund their kingdom's defense, the hammers have begun to ring with a different rhythm. The miners speak of new veins of ore, richer than any found before, that gleam with their own inner light. But there are disturbing reports as well of chambers found that were not carved by dwarf hands, of passages that lead down into depths where no dwarf has ever walked, of sounds echoing from below that speak of things stirring in the dark. Durin IV counsels caution, but his people are desperate, and desperation makes even the wise take risks they would normally shun. Through all these movements, like a thread of gold through a tapestry of shadow, runs the influence of one whose name is whispered in 12 tongues and feared in twice as many. Sauron moves among these scattered powers not as conqueror, but as counselor, not as master, but as ally, offering each what they most desire, while carefully concealing the price that will eventually be demanded. To the Southrons he offers glory and gold, to the Easterlings he promises vengeance against ancient enemies. To the dwarves he whispers of veins of mithril that run deeper than the roots of mountains. But it is among the elves that his influence works most subtly, and perhaps most dangerously. For there are those among the firstborn who look upon the slow decline of their people, the fading of their realms and the dimming of their glory, and wonder if the time has not come to take a more active hand in the governance of Middle-earth. They speak in council chambers and private audiences of the burden of wisdom, of the duty of the enlightened to guide the ignorant, of the need for firm leadership in times of chaos and uncertainty. Galadriel finds herself at the center of these whispered discussions, her counsel sought by those who remember her strength in battle and her wisdom in counsel. They come to her with maps and plans, with schemes for the preservation of elven influence and the extension of elven protection to the scattered realms of men and dwarves. Their arguments are reasonable, their goals admirable, their methods practical. Only gradually does she begin to see the shadow that underlies their seemingly noble purposes. The assumption that what is good for the elves must necessarily be good for all the peoples of Middle-earth. The conviction that their superior wisdom grants them the right, perhaps even the duty, to impose their will upon lesser beings. It is Sauron's logic, she realizes with growing horror. Not his methods, not his cruelty, but his fundamental assumption that those with power have the right to use it, that the strong must guide the weak. That order imposed from above is preferable to chaos chosen from below. The corruption spreads not through force, but through the simple, seductive appeal of certainty in uncertain times, of strength in the face of weakness, of clarity in the midst of confusion. The great ships of Nent-Men arise and fall on swells that seem to carry the weight of prophecy. Their hulls are carved from trees that grew in the youth of the world. Their sails bear the Star of Elendil and the Tree of the Kings, and their holds are filled with the treasures of the greatest realm of mortal men. They come to Middle-earth not as supplicants seeking alliance, but as lords dispensing judgment. Their very presence a reminder of Nent-Men's power and the price of opposing it. Pharazôn the Golden stands upon the prow of his flagship, Alcaronde as the castle of the sea, and surveys the coastline of Middle-earth with the eyes of a conqueror. He sees harbors that could be improved, cities that could be expanded, resources that could be exploited for the greater glory of the Nend-Reen realm. The reports of his scouts paint a picture of a continent in chaos, kingdoms falling to shadow, peoples fleeing their ancient homes, the very order of civilization crumbling beneath the weight of an enemy too terrible to comprehend. But Pharazôn sees opportunity where others see catastrophe. Let the elves retreat to their hidden strongholds. Let the men of Middle Earth cower behind their walls of stone. Nen Menna will restore order through strength, impose peace through power, and in doing so extend its dominion from the western shores to the eastern wastes. The scattered realms of Middle Earth will become provinces of the Ren Rian Empire. Their peoples subjects of the greatest king who has ever drawn breath beneath the stars. Yet even as his fleets darken the waters and his armies march through lands that have not seen such might since the War of Wrath, subtle influences work upon the Golden King's mind. Messengers come to him in the night, bearing words from one who claims knowledge of Middle Earth's ancient secrets, who speaks of hidden treasures and forgotten powers, who promises that alliance with the right patron could grant Nen Menna dominion not merely over Middle Earth but over death itself. The name of this patron is not spoken aloud in the halls of the Nentemenrian fleet, but whispers run through the ranks like wildfire. Some say he is a king of the eastern lands, possessed of wisdom that predates the founding of Nen Menna itself. Others claim he is a mage of tremendous power, wielder of rings that grant mastery over the elements and the hearts of men. A few, the bravest or the most foolish, dare to suggest that he is something else entirely, a being from the earliest days of the world, when the line between servant and master, between order and chaos, was not yet clearly drawn. Pharazôn listens to these whispers with the carefully neutral expression of a king who has learned to keep his own counsel. But in his private chambers, when the night watch has been set and the sea wind carries no sound save the creaking of ship, timber and the distant cry of gulls, he unfolds maps that show more than any cartographer of Nen Menna has ever dreamed. These charts mark not merely coastlines and mountain ranges, but centers of power, nodes of influence, the hidden currents that shape the destiny of nations. And at the heart of those maps, marked with a symbol that seems to shift and change each time he looks at it, lies a fortress that his spies report is both ancient and terrible, both ruined and mighty. Barad-dûr, the Dark Tower, rises from the plateau of Gorgoroth like a fang of black stone, its battlements wreathed in shadow and flame. From its highest tower, it is said, one can see all the lands of Middle Earth spread out like a map, and from its deepest dungeons, one can command powers that make the might of Nen Menna seem like the boasting of children. The king of Nen Menna tells himself that he goes to Middle Earth as liberator, that his armies march to restore order and his fleets sail to establish justice. But in the darkest corners of his heart, where even kings must sometimes admit the truth, he knows that he goes as conqueror, driven by a pride so vast it cannot be contained within the borders of even the greatest island realm. And in those same dark corners, a voice whispers that perhaps conquest is not enough. That perhaps what the world needs is not merely the rule of mortal kings, but the guidance of immortal powers, the wisdom of beings who have watched empires rise and fall like waves upon the shore. It is Sauron's voice, though Pharazôn does not yet know the name. It speaks to him in dreams and visions, in the spaces between sleeping and waking, when the mind is most vulnerable to suggestion. It shows him images of Nen Menna eternal, its towers reaching to the very stars, its people freed from the curse of death, that the One has laid upon all the children of men. It whispers of ancient treaties and older laws, of the right of the strong to command the weak, of the duty of the wise to guide the ignorant. And slowly, subtly, inexorably, it begins to turn his thoughts westward, toward the undying lands themselves, toward the realm of the Valar, where death holds no dominion and time moves with the measured pace of eternity. For if Nantomenaris is to be truly great, if its empire is to encompass all the world, then surely it must claim not merely the dominion of Middle Earth, but the immortality of Valinor itself. Thunder walks the earth in the form of armies beyond counting, their banners black against a sky that weeps ash and cinders. The great war that was prophesied in the earliest days of the Second Age has come at last, and Middle Earth trembles beneath the tread of hosts that have not stirred since Morgoth's defeat. From the gates of Mordor pour forth legions of orcs, their weapons forged in the fires of Mount Doom, their hearts filled with malice older than the sun. From the northern wastes come the dragons, their wings blotting out the light, their breath turning fertile lands to smoking wasteland. But they do not march alone. Beside them stride the Nazgul, the 9 who were once kings among men, and are now something far more terrible. Their forms wrapped in shadow, and their voices carrying despair on every wind. Behind them come the Easterlings and the Southrons, their own grievances against the West driving them to alliance with powers they do not fully understand. And at their head, riding upon a dragon, whose scales are black as midnight, and whose eyes burn with the fire of creation perverted, comes the figure that all Middle Earth has learned to fear Sauron, no longer hiding behind false names and fair forms, but revealed in all his terrible majesty. Against this tide of darkness, the free peoples of Middle Earth array their dwindling strength. Jill, Galad's banner flies above the hosts of Lindon, the blue and silver of the High King, catching what light still penetrates the gloom. Beside him rides Elrond, bearer of Vilya, his face grim with the knowledge of what defeat will mean for all the works of the elder days. The dwarf lords have come forth from their mountain halls, their axes bright with runes of warding, their mail gleaming like stars in the shadow. Men too have answered the call, though their numbers are few, and their hope grows dimmer with each passing hour. And at the very heart of the alliance, terrible in her beauty and implacable in her wrath, rides Galadriel, Lady of Light, bearer of Nenya, commander of the northern armies. Upon her brow shines the light of Erendel's star. In her hand blazes a sword forged in the workshops of Valinor, and in her eyes burns a fire that makes even the darkness of Mordor seem pale by comparison. She has become something more than an elf lady, something other than a guardian of the free peoples. She has become vengeance incarnate, the wrath of the West given form and substance. The battle that follows shakes the very foundations of the world. Mountains split beneath the weight of dragon fire, rivers run red with the blood of the fallen, and the sky itself seems to crack like an eggshell under the pressure of the opposing powers. For 3 days and 3 nights the armies clash, neither side able to gain a decisive advantage, both locked in a struggle that seems destined to consume all of Middle Earth in its fury. On the morning of the 4th day, as the sun rises blood, red through the smoke of 1,000 funeral pyres, the tide begins to turn. Sauron himself enters the fray, his presence on the battlefield like a black sun that consumes light and hope alike. Wherever he rides, the forces of the Alliance crumble, their courage failing them, their weapons turning to ash in their hands. Even the elves, the firstborn who have faced the darkness of Angband and the malice of Morgoth himself, begin to falter before the overwhelming malevolence of the Dark Lord's presence. It is then that Galadriel makes her choice, the choice that will echo through all the ages yet to come. She rides forth alone, challenging Sauron to single combat, her voice carrying across the battlefield with the authority of one who has looked upon the light of the two trees and been counted worthy to bear one of the three rings. The armies pause in their slaughter to watch as these two powers, light and shadow, meet in the space between the hosts. Their confrontation seeming to distill all the conflict of the age into a single, terrible moment. They do not fight with sword and flame, though both weapons are present. They fight with will and word, with the power that shapes reality itself, with forces that were ancient when the world was young. Around them, the very air seems to crack and shimmer, reality bending under the weight of their opposed purposes. Galadriel draws upon all the light that is in her, all the power of her ring, all the accumulated wisdom and strength of millennia, and hurls it like a spear at the heart of darkness. But Sauron too has power. Power drawn from the fire of creation itself. Power that remembers the music of Iluvatar and seeks to remake it in a different key. He does not merely defend against her attack. He embraces it, welcomes it, draws it into himself, and reflects it back transformed. For a moment, just a moment, their powers merge and mingle, light and shadow becoming something that is neither and both. A force so terrible and beautiful that all who witness it fall to their knees in awe and terror. And in that moment of merger, of perfect balance between creation and destruction, Galadriel sees the truth that has been hidden from her all along. She sees Sauron not as he appears to others, the Dark Lord, the enemy, the deceiver, but as he truly is, a being broken by the weight of his own ideals, a servant of creation who sought to perfect the world, and in doing so destroyed everything he touched. She sees the pain that drives his malice, the loneliness that feeds his hunger for dominion, the desperate love for Middle-earth that has curdled into tyranny. And he, in turn, sees her, not the Lady of Light, not the noble guardian of the free peoples, but the proud daughter of the Noldor, who chose exile over submission, who would rather see the world burn than accept a peace imposed by others. He sees in her a reflection of himself, a kindred spirit driven by the same fundamental desire to heal Middle-earth's wounds, to impose order upon chaos, to ensure that the suffering of the innocent comes to an end. When the smoke of battle clears and the crows feast upon the carrion that carpets the field, what remains is not victory or defeat, but something far more complex and terrible. The armies of darkness have been scattered, their great hosts broken and driven back into the shadows from whence they came. The dragons lie slain or fled, their corpses cooling beneath a sky that slowly begins to clear. The alliance of the free peoples has held, their banners still fly. Their courage has not faltered in the face of the ultimate test. But the price of victory weighs heavy upon the survivors. Galad lies dead, struck down in the moment of triumph, his body bearing wounds that will not heal in any hall of the living. Elendil the Tall has fallen beside him, the blade Narsil shattered in his grasp, its fragments scattered upon the stone. Half the armies that marched from Lindon will never see their homes again, their names carved upon monuments that will stand as long as the world endures. And at the heart of the field, where the greatest powers met in their final confrontation, lies a sight that fills even the bravest hearts with unease. Sauron's physical form has been destroyed, his body consumed in the conflagration of his own malice turned back upon itself. But the shadow of his presence lingers, a stain upon the very fabric of reality that seems to pulse with unspent malevolence. The wise speak in hushed tones of the need for vigilance, of the possibility that defeat in body does not mean defeat in spirit, of the chance that the Dark Lord's essence might yet find new form in the hidden places of the world. Galadriel stands upon that blasted heath, her sword still smoking from the fires of her enemy's destruction, her face bearing an expression that none who know her can interpret. Victory should bring joy, or at least satisfaction. The defeat of the greatest enemy of the free peoples should mark the beginning of a new age of peace and prosperity. Yet there is something in her bearing that speaks not of triumph but of loss, not of relief but of a burden grown heavier rather than lighter. For in those final moments of confrontation, when her power merged with Sauron's, and their essences touched across the abyss of moral difference, she learned truths that cannot be unlearned, saw possibilities that cannot be unseen. She felt the weight of his millennia, old grief, the pain of a being who had watched the world grow more broken with each passing age, and had finally decided that only absolute power could prevent absolute catastrophe. She understood, for one terrible instant, the logic that had driven him from service to domination, from healing to harming, from love to tyranny. And more than that, she felt the pull of it herself. In the moment when their powers merged, she glimpsed what they might accomplish together amidst earth healed of all its wounds, ordered according to wisdom rather than whim, guided by beings with the knowledge and strength to ensure that no evil could ever again threaten the innocent. It would require sacrifices, yes, the freedom of mortals to make their own mistakes, the right of lesser beings to stumble toward truth in their own time, the messy democracy of conscience that allows even the foolish to choose their own path. But what were such abstractions compared to the concrete reality of suffering ended, of peace established, of order imposed by those wise enough to impose it justly? The temptation terrifies her more than any orc, blade, or dragon fire, for she has always known herself to be proud, has always struggled with the desire to impose her will upon a world that seems determined to destroy itself through ignorance and hatred. The wisdom of the Valor Council's patience, guidance rather than dominion, the slow cultivation of virtue rather than its forced imposition. But the Valar dwell in the undying lands, removed from the daily suffering of Middle-earth, secure in their immortal certainty. They do not see the children starving while their parents war over scraps of land. Do not witness the slow corruption of noble hearts by the simple pressure of survival in a hostile world. As the survivors of the great battle tend their wounds and count their dead, Galadriel finds herself increasingly isolated. Not by others' rejection, but by her own growing certainty that she alone truly understands what the victory has cost and what it has made possible. Sauron is defeated, yes, but the problems that drove him to darkness remain. Middle-earth is still broken, still chaotic, still filled with peoples too proud or too frightened to accept the guidance they desperately need. The rings of power still exist, still pulse with energies that could reshape the world if wielded by hands wise enough to use them properly. And she bears Nenya, the ring of water, the white ring that preserves and protects. But preserves what? Protects who? The ring responds to the will of its bearer, amplifies their deepest nature, grants them power proportional to their conviction. In Galadriel's hands, it has always been a shield against darkness, a source of strength for the defense of the innocent. But could it not be more? Could it not be a tool for the active improvement of the world, rather than merely its passive protection? The thought grows in her mind like a seed in fertile soil, fed by the memory of Sauron's pain and watered by her own frustration with the limitations of conventional wisdom. She begins to see the hidden connections that link the scattered realms of Middle-earth, the patterns of influence that shape the rise and fall of kingdoms, the leverage points where a small application of force could prevent vast catastrophes. The ring shows her visions of what might be: trade routes secured by elven guardians, disputes settled by immortal arbiters, the slow but steady spread of civilization guided by hands that have the wisdom to guide it well. It is not domination, she tells herself. It is stewardship. It is the responsibility of those who can see clearly to ensure that those who cannot are not led astray by their own blindness. Middle-earth needs healing, and healing sometimes requires the surgeon's knife, the bitter medicine, the temporary restriction of freedom for the sake of long-term health. In the years that follow the great victory, as the free peoples rebuild their shattered realms and the shadow of war slowly fades from memory, whispers begin to circulate in the halls of the wise. They speak of changes in the Lady of Light, subtle alterations in her bearing and her counsel that only those who have known her for centuries can detect. Her wisdom is as deep as ever. Her power remains undimmed. Her dedication to the protection of the innocent is beyond question. Yet something has shifted. Some fundamental axis of her being has tilted toward purposes that even her closest allies cannot fully fathom. She walks now in the margins of the great councils, offering advice that is always sound, but somehow leaves those who hear it feeling obscurely unsettled. Her suggestions are practical, her strategies effective, her vision for the future of Middle-earth both compelling and slightly terrifying. She speaks of the need for coordination between the scattered realms, of the benefits that would flow from shared governance and common purpose, of the wisdom of allowing those with the longest perspective to guide the decisions that will echo through ages yet to come. The realm of Lothlorien begins to change under her influence, becoming something more than a hidden sanctuary and less than an open kingdom. Travelers who pass through its borders speak of roads that appear overnight, of bridges that span rivers thought uncrossable, of settlements that arise in previously empty glades as if called forth by the will of the land itself. The Galadrim, the tree, people who serve the Lady, move with a new purposefulness, their patrols extending far beyond the traditional boundaries of their realm, their watchfulness encompassing territories that have never known elven governance. Yet there is no conquest here, no armies marching forth to claim new dominions. Instead, there is something far more subtle and perhaps more effective: the slow, steady spread of elven influence through trade and treaty, through the offering of aid and the acceptance of obligation, through the gradual establishment of a web of relationships that makes the Lady of Light an indispensable mediator in the affairs of all the neighboring realms. The other bearers of the three rings watch these developments with growing concern. Elrond, now master of the newly founded Rivendell, finds his own counsel increasingly sought by those who find Galadriel's guidance too comprehensive. He offers wisdom without obligation, healing without expectation of service, sanctuary without the subtle pressure to conform to elven ideals of order and civilization. Yet even he cannot escape the nagging suspicion that his way, however pure in intention, is also less effective in practice, that his willingness to allow mortals to make their own mistakes may be a luxury the world can no longer afford. Circle Thranduil in his woodland realm marks the changes with the wariness of one who has seen empires rise and fall, who remembers the pride that drove the Noldor into exile and the ambition that brought ruin to kingdoms that seemed eternal. He closes his borders more tightly, withdraws his people deeper into the shadows of the great forest, and prepares for a future where the question may not be whether Middle Earth will be ruled by darkness or light, but which shade of light will prove most conducive to the flourishing of his people. But it is among the younger races, the men and dwarves who lack the long perspective of the elves, that Galadriel's influence spreads most quickly and takes deepest root. They see in her not the potentially dangerous concentration of ancient power, but the wisdom they need to navigate the complex challenges of the post-war world. Her interventions prevent conflicts that could have consumed generations. Her mediation resolves disputes that might have festered for centuries. Her guidance helps young kingdoms establish institutions that could endure for ages yet to come. The irony is not lost on those few who remember the warnings of the Valar, that the greatest corruptions come not from evil's direct assault, but from good's own excesses, from the desire to do right becoming the compulsion to impose righteousness, from love becoming control and protection becoming dominion. Galadriel loves Middle Earth with a passion that burns brighter than dragon fire, and that love drives her to ensure its welfare by any means necessary, to impose peace and order and justice, whether its peoples welcome such gifts or not. And in the darkest hours of the night, when even the immortal must sometimes confront the shadows in their own hearts, she finds herself wondering if this is what Sauron felt in his earliest days of rebellion. Did he too begin with nothing but love for the world and its creatures? Did he too see suffering that could be prevented, chaos that could be ordered, ignorance that could be enlightened? At what point does the desire to heal become the compulsion to control? When does the guardian become the tyrant? The questions haunt her, but they do not stop her. For regardless of the philosophical implications, the practical benefits of her approach are undeniable. Trade flourishes under her protection, learning spreads through her patronage, and the lands under her influence know a peace and prosperity that they have not experienced since the elder days. If the price of such benefits is a gradual erosion of local autonomy, a slow subordination of mortal will to immortal wisdom, then perhaps that is a price worth paying. After all, freedom is only valuable to those wise enough to use it well, and wisdom is only achievable by those who live long enough to learn from their mistakes. The mortals of Middle-earth, for all their courage and creativity, simply do not have the perspective necessary to make the decisions that will affect not merely their own brief lives, but the long history of the world. It is not tyranny to guide them toward choices they would make themselves if they could see as clearly as their immortal guardians can see. It is merely practical. The wheel of time turns, seasons become years, years become decades, and the second age draws toward its close, like a great tapestry nearing completion. The pattern that will define the third age is already visible to those with eyes to see it. Nantmena's star ascending toward its zenith, before the inevitable fall, the rings of power dispersed to their destined bearers, the lines of the future drawn in fire and shadow across the face of Middle-earth. And at the heart of the pattern, her influence spreading like ripples from a stone cast into still water, stands Galadriel, Lady of Light, bearer of Nenya. The power behind the growing network of alliances and obligations that increasingly defines the politics of the free peoples. She has not taken a crown, has claimed no throne, has conquered no territories in the traditional sense. Yet her word carries weight in every council, her favor is sought by every kingdom, and her displeasure is feared by all who would maintain their position in the delicate web of relationships that now spans Middle-earth. The vision comes to her on a night when the stars are hidden by clouds and the wind carries the scent of distant storms. In the mirror of Galadriel, that uncanny pool which shows not what is but what might be, she sees herself standing in a great hall whose pillars are wrought of living light, and whose dome encompasses all the sky. Around her kneel the representatives of every people of Middle-earth, men and elves, dwarves and hobbits, even reformed orcs and humbled dragons, all united in purpose and guided by wisdom that transcends the petty divisions of race and realm. It is a beautiful vision, a dream of unity and peace that surpasses even the glory of Valinor. Under her gentle guidance, war has become impossible, hunger is unknown, and every creature lives according to its nature, while contributing to the greater harmony of the whole. The shadow of Sauron has been replaced by the light of perfect order. Chaos has given way to cosmos, and the music of Ilúvatar plays in harmonies more complex and beautiful than any that were heard at the world's beginning. Yet even as she watches this glorious future unfold, a part of her mind notes the details that make the vision troubling rather than inspiring. The representatives of the various peoples do not stand as equals but kneel as subjects, their faces bearing expressions of gratitude rather than joy, their postures speaking of submission rather than willing cooperation. The light that fills the great hall is beautiful, yes, but it is also constant, unchanging. Eliminating the shadows that give meaning to illumination, the darkness that makes the light precious. And at the center of it all, on a throne that seems carved from a single star, sits a figure whose beauty is terrible and whose wisdom is absolute. It is herself, but transformed. elevated beyond the limitations of personal will and individual desire into something that partakes more of principle than personality. The Lady of Light has become light itself, a force of nature rather than a person, a cosmic function rather than an individual consciousness. The vision fades, leaving her standing alone beside the still waters of her mirror, her reflection fractured by ripples that might be caused by wind or might be caused by tears. For she has seen the end toward which her path leads, and while it is not evil, indeed, it surpasses mortal notions of good and evil entirely. It is not quite what she had intended when she first took up the burden of guidance and protection. Yet what is the alternative? To step back, to withdraw her influence, to allow the peoples of Middle Earth to stumble blindly toward whatever fate their limited wisdom leads them to. She has seen too much suffering, prevented too much catastrophe, to believe that such abdication of responsibility is anything other than moral cowardice. The world needs shepherds, and she is perhaps the only shepherd strong enough and wise enough to guide the entire flock. The thought of Sauron comes to her unbidden, as it so often does in these moments of moral complexity. He too had stood at such a crossroads, had faced the choice between the burden of absolute responsibility and the luxury of limited engagement. He too had chosen to bear the weight of the world rather than let it fall. The difference, she tells herself, is that where he sought to impose order through fear and domination, she seeks to cultivate it through love and guidance. Where he would rule as tyrant, she would govern as guardian. But in the darkest corner of her heart, a voice whispers that the difference may be less significant than she wishes to believe. For in the end, both paths lead to the same destination, a world in which mortal will is subordinated to immortal wisdom, in which freedom is sacrificed for security, in which the messy democracy of conscience gives way to the efficient autocracy of benevolent despotism. The dawn finds her still standing by the mirror, her face bearing an expression of resolution tinged with sorrow. For she has seen the shape of tomorrow, and while it is not what she would have chosen in the innocence of youth, it is what circumstances have made necessary. Middle-earth will have its healing, its peace, its golden age of prosperity and order. And if the price is the gradual eclipse of mortal agency by immortal will, if the cost is the transformation of guidance into governance and protection into control, then perhaps that is simply the price that must be paid for wisdom to triumph over folly, for order to conquer chaos, for love to overcome the self, destructive impulses that seem inherent in the nature of free will itself. Thus ends the tale of transformation, of light that learns to cast its own shadows, of love that grows so fierce it devours its object. The Lady Galadriel stands at the threshold of a new age, no longer the guardian. She was but not yet the ruler she will become, poised between the memory of what she intended and the reality of what she has become. The future stretches ahead like an unwritten book, its pages filled with possibilities both bright and dark, both beautiful and terrible. And in the shadows that gather at the margins of her influence, in the spaces between her thoughts and the silence behind her words, something that might once have been called Sauron's ghost watches with eyes that gleam with satisfaction. For in the end, it matters little whether Middle Earth is ruled by shadow or light, by fear or love, by the iron fist or the velvet glove. What matters is that it is ruled, that chaos gives way to order, that the wild freedom of mortal choice is replaced by the predictable patterns of immortal design. The wheel turns, the age ends, and the next begins. And Galadriel, Lady of Light, bearer of power, walks into tomorrow carrying within her heart both the promise of paradise and the seed of its corruption, both the hope of healing and the certainty of domination. For she has learned the hardest lesson of all, that the road to tyranny is paved with the best of intentions, and that the greatest enemy of freedom is not malice but love. Love so fierce and protective that it will destroy what it seeks to save, rather than risk losing it to the uncertain mercies of choice. Thus the prophecy fulfills itself, as prophecies always do, in ways that its speakers never intended and its hearers never expected. The age of heroes ends not in the triumph of good over evil, but in the recognition that good and evil are perhaps not as different as the innocent believe. That power corrupts not through malice, but through the terrible weight of responsibility, and that the line between salvation and damnation is drawn not in the stars but in the human heart, or in this case, the immortal heart that has forgotten what it means to be merely human. The tale is told, the die is cast, and middle. Earth waits to discover what manner of golden age its new guardian will create from the ashes of the old. Whether it will be a paradise or a prison remains to be seen. Perhaps in the end, the difference will prove to be less important than those who must live within its boundaries might hope. And so we leave the Lady Galadriel standing at the crossroads of destiny. No longer the warrior who set sail from Valinor in the pride of youth. No longer the guardian who stood against the darkness in the strength of her convictions. But something new and strange and terrible. A being transformed by power and responsibility into an instrument of cosmic will. A force of nature wearing the face of compassion. A tyrant who rules through love rather than fear, but rules nonetheless with a completeness that makes resistance not merely futile, but unthinkable. The transformation is complete. The prophecy is fulfilled. And the fourth age, when it comes, will rise from foundations laid not by the defeat of evil, but by the apotheosis of good. Good carried to such extremes that it becomes indistinguishable from its opposite. Love so pure and perfect that it leaves no room for the beloved to be anything other than what the lover demands. Thus the wheel turns. Thus the ages pass, and thus the eternal cycle of creation and corruption, of order and chaos, of freedom and control, continues its dance through time and space and the endless possibilities of story. The tale ends where it began, in twilight and uncertainty, in the space between what was and what will be, in the eternal moment when all futures remain possible and all choices wait to be made. The Lady Galadriel has chosen her path, but the consequences of that choice will echo through ages yet unborn, shaping the destiny of Middle Earth in ways that even her immortal wisdom cannot foresee. Dear listener, this story ends, but many await. Subscribe so no tale escapes you.